prepare for it. Right? Get your muscular system stronger. And I don't mean dynamically, because dynamically, if you're strong, it will rip you apart.
Yeah.
I mean isometrically increase your strength. And the reason that everyone gets better that uses Isofit, and I'm comfortable to say that, everyone that uses Isofit gets better.
Welcome back to the 175th episode of the Athletes Podcast featuring Brad Thorpe, who is considered by many as the world's leading expert in isometric strength training, a serial entrepreneur, multi-patent holder, and inventor of Isophit, as well as an educator. Brad has over 30 years of experience in the fitness, health, and performance industry. In 2022, Brad was dubbed as Mr. Isometrics by world-leading strength and conditioning professor John Cronin. Since launching Isophit in 2015, Brad has grown the Isofit family to 360 members across 32 countries, with customers like the Cleveland Cavaliers, Philadelphia 76ers, Miami Heat. You may have heard of a couple of those. Oh, did I mention the FBI and the U.S. Army? No big deal. If you have not seen the power of Isometrics, you are going to benefit from this hour and 20-minute conversation with Brad. Phenomenal experience, wisdom, expertise, knowledge dropped during this episode. Midway through, it was so hot that the fire trucks came by. They were ringing. It was crazy. I can't thank Brad enough for coming on the show, sharing his insights, stories. I'm still buzzing off it, as you can tell, and I can't wait for you folks to listen. It's another doozy of an episode that's sponsored by Rooted, 24 vitamins and minerals, 3 times the electrolytes of sports drinks, and 9 superfoods and probiotics. Use the code AP18 to get 18% off your very own Rooted package. Prenatal, women's, men's options, you name it, they've got it. Check it out at rooted.com. Now, without further ado, episode 175 of the Athletes Podcast featuring Brad Thorpe. Before we get in, hit that subscribe button, turn up the volume, let's get after it. Here we go. It's a really interesting point that you brought up there, and I want to start with that because it's like ties into the way we kind of got connected like 48 hours ago, basically on LinkedIn. I feel like was like the first time we got connected, and I really didn't know much about you, Isofit, which is surprising because I feel like I do a ton of research in the sports space, fitness space, and I hadn't heard as much about you as I typically would someone else. And what you said there is get noticed by enough people, but not noticed by too many people. Like, how describe that again? How did you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like, I want to be noticed by the right people. Like it's not about mass marketing. It's more about grassroots, referral-based business. And the beautiful thing is with some of my client load, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but I get referral sources from some of the biggest names in sport. So my marketing dollar currently is, less than $10,000 a year. I don't spend money on marketing, and yet we're in 32 countries. We have over 360 clients since 2015, and that consists of the U.S. Army, the FBI, 20% of the NBA. So we're in some pretty awesome places and helping some extraordinary athletes get better, right?
That's got to be a pretty good feeling.
It is, and I'm a small town kid. I grew up in a town, Acton, Ontario, with less than 5,000 people. I didn't have my second stops or set of stoplights until I was in grade 12.
Wow.
I had a horse track in my backyard. This is like for me, a couple of years ago, and this is wicked cool, and I thought this was an absolute joke. So I'm checking my inbox, and I get this message from the U.S. Army. And, you're reading, it's like, this is just BS. I can't believe this. Like, really, the U.S. Army's contacting me. And lo and behold, a couple months later, I'm now down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, consulting with the U.S. Army. So that was pretty awesome.
Is this stemming from being dubbed Mr. Isometrics, or how do people locate, see who you are online? Because you're trying to keep this incognito mode, I feel like.
Yeah, it's if you're in the know. So the dubbing of Mr. Isometrics came later. Okay. So this was Just word of mouth. I've been around Isometrics and really heavily promoting it since about 2008. Just basically using a wall, right? You can do like Isometrics over here. If I'm using this table, I can push down and I can fire up my lat. If I'm pulling up, I can fire up my chest. If I'm using this wall behind me, I can do my posterior deltoid. But we've never thought about that. So with my designations, and this is going back to 2006, I was the 21st person in the world with my dual designations. So I studied under the pitchman for Bowflex, a guy named Tom Purvis. So he was on TV for I think 16 years pitching that product. And then a guy named Greg Groskoff, who created a form of therapy called muscle activation techniques. And his sort of claim to fame was he was the reason that Peyton Manning, or one of the primary reasons Peyton Manning went out to Denver after he injured his neck, was to work with Greg. Right. So I studied under both of these gentlemen for a couple of years. So it was giving me insight into exercise science, and performance that normally you wouldn't get.
Right.
It's like leading edge information. And neither of those organizations really focused on isometrics. And it was in 2007 I heard about a study from McMaster University, which is a local university around here, and what they stated was, it was on a radio show, and they did some research, and what they stated was isometrics was better for blood pressure. It stated that it was the equivalent of a single pharmaceutical agent for lowering blood pressure. And at that point in my life, I was struggling with hypertension for about 14 years. And I heard this one piece of literature, so I'm 21st person in the world with my designations. 14 years struggling with blood pressure. 2 weeks later, my blood pressure is normalized after 14 years by implementing an isometric training approach to my exercise routine. And I was still doing dynamic exercise and stuff like that. So that's kind of where that sort of stemmed from. And then from there, to get back to your original question, I just started basically jumped in head first, went to the world and sort of said, everyone needs to start doing isometrics. And all my online sort of profile, if you go back to about 2008, all I do is really talk about isometrics. But it's all through my social channels, which are not huge by any means. But because of my studying and who I got to meet in my courses, I got to meet some of the world's elite strength coaches and trainers and performance experts because they were all searching for that same subject area.
And it's actually surprising. I honestly think you're going to see an incredible jump here over the next couple of years because what you're doing is impacting so many positively on a world stage. That part alone is going to be phenomenal, I think. So it'll be interesting to see whether that incognito mode comes off over the next couple of years. But what I did want to talk about is the fact that you had family members who had these issues as well, right? You had two individuals who had heart issues, blood pressure. So this is something you saw for decades, and you're like, I need to fix this because I'm going through it as well. Yeah.
So the reason I got into the exercise and performance world was my mom's dad died when she was 15 years old of a massive heart attack. So he was 45 years old, so I never met my grandfather. But I lived in a house where heart health was always discussed. And then when my grandmother, so she died when I was 7. And also a massive heart attack. She was 68. So my mom would have been 33, 34 years of age at that point. So significantly younger than I am. So grew up just in that household where it was like, my mom lost her parents. My dad's always been in the picture. And, a couple of years ago, he had basically heart surgery as well. So we've always been around heart health. So for me, that's the driving force is how do we help individuals who are out there with hypertension, which obviously can lead or is a root cause of stroke, as well as heart failure or heart attack. So if there's a way that is better for, why aren't we promoting it? Why aren't we jamming it down people's throats? That here is a better, safer, more effective and efficient way to lower blood pressure. Like most people will tell you, go out and do cardio training to train your heart. It's inefficient, it doesn't work, and the result of, if you look at the studies, the results are garbage. Like they're absolutely garbage, as opposed to if you compare them directly to isometrics, isometrics reigns supreme. And this is the American Heart Association has put this out. British Journal of Sports Medicine came out 2 years ago, and they did a comparative analysis between cardiovascular training, resistance training, high intensity interval training, and isometric training. And isometric training won.
Wow.
right? And you look at that and you go, well, all those other things are what we consistently promote. Yes, absolutely. And that's why we have 1.7 billion people with hypertension issues. I resolved mine in 2 weeks. We've helped countless people get off blood pressure medication once implementing an isometric training approach. And there's multiple reasons for that. We focus, when we're talking about cardiovascular health, we focus on the heart, and we focus on your blood pressure, and we focus on heartbeat traditionally. Nobody ever talks about how the blood gets back to your heart, which is controlled via a muscle pump. So if you have an inefficiency to your muscular system, your heart has to work harder in order to circulate your blood, right? So if I create better levels of muscle contractility, right? So if my glenohumeral joint, so shoulder joint, if that compresses better because my muscle tension increases. So if you think of the artery as a series of tubes, right? If I take a tube and put it on stretch, what happens? It narrows, it thins. Okay, cool. Is that 100% predictable?
No.
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
Every time?
100% of the time. If you stretch a tube, it always thins.
Yeah.
Right? So if you take it off stretch, you're going to have a wider diameter and a thicker wall.
Okay.
Right? And that's 100% predictable. It's principles of elasticity.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, okay, cool. And their arteries and veins and stuff like that are of elastic nature.
Right.
So if I'm able to cause better levels of compression, that artery opens up. It's kind of like going from a 1-lane highway to a 4-lane highway.
It's like Toronto construction. That doesn't take a decade.
Man, have you seen this garbage? It's awful, right? But yeah, it's exactly like that. So if you have congestion within sort of the flow of blood, you're going to have higher levels of peripheral resistance. So yeah, so that's basically my driving force. And I'm now working with guys with what are called LVAD, so left ventricular assist device.
The zombie.
The zombie. Oh, you did your research. Yeah. Good old Keith down in Katy, Texas. So we work with him. So Keith basically has a non-functioning heart. He died. He died. He was in a coma for 3 months. Zero function to his heart. He's on this thing called an LVAD, which is left ventricular assist device. So he's a former Isophit user. So it's like, Keith, let me see if I can help you. At this point, he was basically... died, brought back to life, doesn't have a heart, couldn't even adjust the Isophit when he got it. We started with a 1 minute per day protocol. Right? He's like, what's 1 minute a day going to do for me? I'm like, get you to 2 minutes. Yeah. He's like, oh, okay, logical.
Overload this
progressive. Yeah, because the cool thing is when you're looking at isometrics, there's some research out there that will indicate that 1 minute of isometric muscle force or a muscle contraction is the equivalent to 6 minutes of dynamic resistance training on selectorized equipment. So for Keith, we started with 6 minutes, and we went to 12 minutes, and then we went to 18 minutes, then we went to 24 minutes, and by the time we got to 5 minutes, we're now doing half an hour training, or the equivalent of.
Right.
And it's like, oh, well, that's way more efficient. Yeah, absolutely. If I can save you 25 minutes in your time and give you a better result. But with Keith, what it was, we got him to a point where he is strong enough so he could start to participate in life. And to me, that's like my ultimate success story. It's beautiful. And we were just talking before we started up, like Joel Embiid. So I'm a supplier to the Philadelphia 76ers and a bunch of the other NBA organizations. So yeah, we have an MVP that uses Isophit.
That didn't last year. And they had the best season since Allen Iverson, which I think was 2001. But James Harden led the league in assists. Joel Embiid led the league in points, now is deemed the MVP. They got to close it out. Just for Isophits.
Yeah, well, more for the city of Philadelphia and all the athletes. I mean, we're a component of an extraordinary team of professionals. And, I would love to say, yes, it's all Isophit. It's, they bought it and they transformed. But I'm not going to say that it hasn't had an impact because of all the other teams that we saw have impact. So we're with basically 5 NBA teams. Each one of them improved their defensive stats for points per game. Right?
Wow. We
had number 1 team, number 2 team, and number 3 team. I think Minnesota was 18, I believe, in the league. And then the Houston Rockets, they improved. Unfortunately, they're a really young team, but they just got some amazing coaching. So I'm excited to see where they go next year, and hopefully they get Victor Wembanyama out of France, which would be amazing. So he formerly was with an Isophit team.
So you think of like now impacting 20% of the NBA, clients like the FBI, the U.S. Army. One of the things that we talked about yesterday was the fact that like these are ultimately just athletes at the end of the day working in these emergency response roles. You strip it down, these guys are wearing uniforms, these individuals are wearing uniforms. At the end of the day, everyone is just competing, becoming a better athlete. And what your system is doing is making people better athletes across the board.
I would say we specialize in human performance. So if you're human and you want to perform better, and that doesn't matter if you're an 85-year-old grandmother of 23, it doesn't matter. If we can engage your muscular system better, you're going to function better as a human. The likelihood of disease goes down, right? And we put these little kids and young adults, like the biggest kid that I've ever seen use Isophit, 6'9", 385 pounds. He was 18. Woo. Now, I'm going to tell you that he's prepubescent. He's not fully developed. And we treat him as a workhorse. We treat him as basically this ox that should be theoretically able to run through brick walls. But yet he is not fully developed. His structures are not fully developed. They're just larger. And we tend, as an industry, abuse these young kids to the point where they're injured, and then they have to recover. They don't recover. They alter the rest of their life. And they deal with these pains. And if you look at some of the health stats of professional football players or even college football players, they have poor end of life across the board, right? They tend to die several years earlier than the average population. And it's like, okay, well, for the love of the sport, sure. You know, it's an athletic podcast, and I'm not going to say don't play athletics. Prepare for it, right? Get your muscular system stronger, and I don't mean dynamically, because dynamically, if you're strong, it will rip you apart. I mean isometrically increase your strength, and the reason that everyone gets better that uses Isophit, and I'm comfortable to say that everyone that uses Isophit gets better. The reason for that is because of the way muscles work. We forget, because everyone's like, oh, you have to move, you have to get up and train. What is it? Movement is medicine. But yet everyone who moves gets injured and requires therapy or drugs eventually, because otherwise all humans would be great if movement actually worked. It actually accelerates degenerative change if you want to really look at the nitty-gritty of it. I mean, the CDC put out a report, the number one leading cause of individuals who are admitted to hospital over the age of 5 years old. And it was related to athletics and sport and everything like that. The number one reason was general gym exercise.
That's probably attributed to misuse of equipment or inability to perform the exercises, though.
Absolutely. Right. But that's what we're recommending to athletes to go train. Right.
Yes.
So the number 2 is football. The number 3 is basketball. The number 4 was ice hockey. So we're telling the guys who are playing football, basketball, and ice hockey, the way they're going to train for those sports is to go and train in the number one leading cause of injury. We got to think about that. Like, you remember a couple years ago, and you'll be familiar with this, they put in a pitch count for like youth baseball. Why was that?
Probably had a significant uptick in arm injuries from pitchers.
Due to overuse, right? So what we're telling these athletes and how we're teaching these athletes how to train is by saying more repetitions, more. And what we've seen is now the professional leagues, we're now have conversations about load management, and now they're calling these athletes a bunch of, they're going, oh, well, in the 80s, there was no injuries. And well, the way that we're training athletes now has significantly changed. We're now focused on a lot of, let's do these wobbly exercises that look really cool on Instagram. And when you look at it and go, well, if I'm adding instability, let's say you're an athlete and you're unstable, and I add instability to that training method, my force output goes down, it doesn't go up. It may be neurologically challenging, it might be require more effort to complete, but it's making you weaker. It is not making you a stronger athlete, and then you get into the real game scenario where the forces are significantly higher, and you don't have that ability to actually tolerate those forces, injury occurs. I was like, okay, cool. That's not the direction we need to be going. And from an industry, we've had more tech over the last several years, and we're monitoring every single piece of data, but yet injuries haven't gone down. Mm-hmm. So why is it? Well, you have to truly look at how we are training people. It's not that it's too much, it's just inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And more so, what they need to do is not add more instability to more instability, because we know the outcome of that is just further instability. It's not, oh, all of a sudden I got more stable because I added more instability. Mm-hmm. Now here's the kicker. Dynamic exercise, by virtue of having to move, has to be unstable.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, there's no other way. So how do you resolve instability within structure? The only way you can do that is by isometric training.
Right.
To get that muscular system stronger, to get it firing faster. Now here's the fact that everyone forgets. Isometrics, there's an upregulation of isometric muscle tension before all dynamic movement expression. And that's at every angle change in human motion. You have to have an upregulation of tension. You don't see it, it happens way too quick. Mm-hmm. We're talking like 0 to 50 milliseconds. Mm-hmm. You have basically the tendon gets stiff, and the reason that tendon gets stiff is due to the upregulation of isometric tension. And then they'll talk about rate of force development, which is an isometric, basically an upregulation of that isometric tension. Mm-hmm. And then they talk about peak force, and then they talk about movement expression. So there's this whole section that trainers don't know about. Mm-hmm. It's lost on them. They want to argue it. They want to say it's not relevant. They want to say it's a fad. And it's like, how is a type of muscle contraction or a type of movement a fad for an athlete? So I no longer argue with people online about this. It's just, you just don't know. Yeah. And do I know more than them? In the subject area, the answer is a hard yes. Yeah. And I'm comfortable with that. I'll own that.
You brought up Peyton Manning. Obviously, he had 2 of his best years after obviously performing this program. So that was
No, that's Greg Roscott. So not with Isophit. No.
It's following similar strategies.
Similar-ish protocols, yes. Okay. So that's more of a manual therapy. They do use isometrics to an extent in their therapy, mm-hmm. but it's more about, so with that type of method, and it works. There's no question about that. So what they do is they look at basically how does the neuromuscular system fire? How do we optimize that? And this guy, Greg, through his years of studies and stuff like that, basically figured out that when humans, and this is one of their principal philosophies, is when you sense tension, it's due to muscular weakness, usually on the opposing side of the axis, right? So it's a protective mechanism, right? So if this side is tight, it's usually, let's say this side is weak, and that's an oversimplification, right? So I will walk around like this, and you go, well, the problem's over on this left side, and it's like, well, not really. The left side is doing its job. It's contracting because that's what muscles do. The problem is the right side is not contracting, right? So you take that philosophy, and I had a client a bunch of years ago, and he's like, hey, it's kind of like a marionette. Like, what do you mean? He's like, well, just imagine you have a mass of 100 pounds, and you have one string. Well, that string is, in that marionette scenario, that string always represents the muscles. So for you guys listening, so there's going to be 100 pounds on that string. Well, how do I sort of lessen the stress on that string? Well, add 2 strings. Now it's 50 pounds. Well, what happens if you have 10 strings? Well, now 10 pounds each. Yeah. Cool. Now this is where it gets cool. So let's say I cut 3 strings. Well, it's now 7, so now it's 14.28 pounds per string. Mm-hmm. So there's a 40% workload increase on the working muscles, right? And it's like, oh, okay, well, if those 7 remaining are tight, well, we traditionally go, tension's bad. Mm-hmm. Let's cut another string. Well, now it's 16.67 pounds per string. So we're almost at a 70% workload increase on the remaining working muscles. Mm-hmm. So how do we fix that? Well, let's employ an isometric approach, train some muscles I might not know the names of because there's 640 plus muscles in the body, right? Most people talk about 5 of them consistently, right? So it's like, okay, well, if we can increase the contractility of 640 muscles, right, add more strings. Yeah. So let's just take that scenario. Let's say we get back to 10. That's perfect. And it's like, yay, how do we perfect on perfect? Well, let's add 10 more strings. Mm-hmm. So now it's only 5 pounds per string, right? Once again, living in the world of just understanding math.
Yeah.
We don't apply that to our structure. Now, it's a little bit more complicated, but not much. And then when we look at how do we explore tendons, which is never a part of the conversation until you have tendonitis or a tendon tear. There's over 4,000 tendons in the human body, right? And tendons are responsible for transmitting force to create movement between that muscle system and the skeletal structure. So if we're forgetting that tendon from a training methodology and a training thought process, our athletes are going to be injured. Our workers in workplace are going to be injured. And when you explore the data, 50% of all reported injuries, and this is globally, amongst athletes and workers, is associated with tendon structure and ligamentous structure.
Whoa.
And that's globally, so that's a lot. And we look at that and go, why aren't we? Why is it not even a part of the conversation?
Yeah.
So with what we do with Isophit, and I don't like saying it this way, but it's probably a little bit more correct. We accidentally train all your tendons in your body by having you do long hold isometric based efforts and contractions, where our aim is to have you hold 45 seconds, where you're generating. If I was pushing down, it'd be my effort's going to be for 45 seconds. Right? There's natural analgesic effects, so it helps get rid of pain. It helps strengthen the tendon structure. It helps get the muscular system stronger from an endurance perspective, so we can sit here and have a conversation for an hour. Like I'm really glad that we want to do this all day, and it's like, okay, well, that's great. We don't actually function that way as humans. We sleep 6 to 8 hours a night horizontally, right? We don't move around that much. So the natural tone of muscle tissue is isometric. So if we don't have that engaged, you wake up, you're still young, but you'll wake up with back pain, you'll wake up with shoulder pain, you'll wake up with neck pain. Most older people, they want to put pillows between their legs, so they don't stretch all evening, right? So it's like little things like that,
Bodybuilders have been doing isometrics in the form of just poses for decades.
They're literally the sport of isometrics.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, how do I flex on stage? And if you've ever talked to bodybuilders, posing is brutal. Like, it's physically taxing.
Extremely. We were just with Tyler Johnson, who's a Olympia competitor last year, and Liam Gummo, who's got his first show coming out in 2.5 weeks. So shout out to him, probably right as this episode drops. But we were talking about the benefits of isometrics, dynamic training, sprinting, what they're incorporating into their training to see success. One of the things we talked about is sprints would be huge because he doesn't do them. So there's a benefit. I saw some study, something like a ridiculous, I can't remember the exact number, I'll find it, but a crazy amount of people don't sprint ever after the age of 30. That's probably because you don't need to, right? And it's probably a risky thing to do for most people if you're not training in that way, but it could be beneficial for an Olympia training bodybuilder.
It's sprint work is amazing, and what I don't want the audience to think is I'm not anti-dynamic exercise. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just wicked pro isometrics because I can reduce your risk of injury doing dynamic exercise to near zero.
Yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to clarify, because I think people will listen to this and think, oh, I just have to sit there, push against a wall, use an Isophit machine, and I'm good. When in reality, it's probably a collaboration of all of those activities.
Technically, it depends on goal. Because we're dealing with athletes, build your isometric strength, build your isometric strength endurance, and build your isometric rate of force development. So put that in 3 hubs.
Okay.
And then practice the skills required in your sport. It'd be my recommendation.
Okay.
Right? There's nobody who's doing bench press unless you're a power lifter where it's actually required in your sport. I mean, the guy who set the NFL combine record for bench press, and I think he came from Oregon University, and I do forget his name, he did 49 reps, but he didn't make the NFL. So it's like, okay, if bench press was actually truly important, like to the point where it's like, it's so important, he would have been in the NFL. He would actually be making the most out of any person in the NFL because he did like 49 reps with 225. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
But didn't transfer to football skill. You know, so it's like, okay, what is the transferability of what it is you're doing from a training perspective needs to be identified.
Yeah. What are you optimizing for at the end of the day?
Yeah. Like, what's your energy system? What muscles are required? More importantly, you got to be durable and you got to show up on game day, right? And if there's a way that you can reduce injury in your training methodology, right? Like, people talk about dynamic exercise. Well, if I push and relax, push and relax, push and relax, push and relax, you know, I still get that same stimulus. I just don't have you can hear that. So that's happening at my joint. You know, did you want joint inflammation? Because that's a thing. It was funny. And so we're sitting in TMU right now. So a couple of years ago, I had the ear of Dustin Reed, who is I believe, still is the coach of the women's program it was Ryerson at the time. They had an undefeated season. They reduced their practice times.
Okay.
Right? And you look at that and you go, well, their athletes were ready on game day. They were already skilled. They're universally level athletes. Okay, how much more skillful are they going to get? You know, a little bit, but most practices, and I'm not saying avoid stress, but if you're doing too much for no significant benefit, you know, it's kind of like, okay, well, he reduced the number of practices and they went undefeated. And that was the first time in, you know, Canadian university history that you went from undefeated season to championship, which is pretty cool. And they had a massively dominant program.
Just concerns me when I see athletes from the age of 5 years old to 15, 25 training every single day, the same movement patterns on the ice. And I'm like, for example, because I just see so many kids, I'll use hockey as the example. It's like from the age of 5, they're literally skating, power skating, shooting, dealing with pucks, and it's never ending. And I think about the impact and the damage that that's doing to the body. And like you said, the long term, what's that going to do at the age of 35, 40 when you retire? What's the rest of your life going to look like?
Yeah. Well, you look at it and go, well, how many people make 35?
Yeah, that's true.
You know, most people don't make it past 14. You know, you look at the attrition rates of youth athletics. They stopped because they were not having fun, or they stopped because they were injured. You know, it's usually one of those scenarios. I mean, there's outlying reasons, but for the most part, it's I don't like it. And why don't they like it? It's usually due to the fact that it was injurious, or there was an abusive coach where it wasn't fun anymore. You know, or to be honest, they may have just lost all the time. You know, it's fun playing, but it's more fun winning. You know, so you look at some of those things, and I've had many conversations over the years with coaches about how do we reduce the rate of injury in youth athletics. You know, and I was working with an organization called Pac-Man Volleyball, and this is going back 2011, 2012, and they were national title champions and stuff like that. And but their athletes were chronically injured. And Kelly Smith is the head of the program. So Kelly contacted me. He's like, I've been following you doing this isometric stuff. You mind coming out and sort of helping our kids? And so absolutely. I love volleyball. I actually went to school on a volleyball scholarship and went out, showed them a couple exercises. We gave them 12 exercises that they could do against a wall. So this is predating the actual Isophit unit. So they went pretty much won the championships, had 0 injuries. So a team that was decimated by injuries the year before to 0 injuries, and that was club-wide, right? And if you look at the size and scale of their club, it's pretty large. And you look at it and well, how is that? Well, youth athletes, if they're unstable because they're growing and they're gangly and they're, you know, if you're dealing with volleyball guys, they're 6'5" at 14.
Sam Pedlow.
Yes, Sam Pedlow, a former client of mine, great guy, physiotherapist by education, trade. Oh, he's awesome. He's a beast. Yeah. I mean, well, he was deadlifting. I saw your clip. He was 550 pounds deadlifting out of 6 foot. I think he's 6'5". I think 6'4". And I mean, he's just a physical specimen. But yeah, we helped him. Like you, I connected with him on social media. So invited Sam in to say, hey, come try this out. And at that point, he was dealing with a 2-centimeter tear in a supraspinatus tendon of his hitting arm, so his right shoulder. And when you're looking at athletes who are of a professional standard, I mean, he was Team Canada playing internationally, And so if you have a tear in your supraspinatus as a volleyball player, you're not playing very much, and you're certainly going to play in pain. So we helped him prepare for the season. And once again, there's many contributing factors. I know Sam was in, and we saw him basically 4 times a week. So he was in a lot. He was also training at the Olympic Training Center. But he played 34 tournaments that year, right, with what we were able to do with his shoulder stability. He subsequently won the FIVB Most Improved Player in 2017, right? And another kid I work with is a guy named Siobhan Vernon Evans. So he is the youngest kid to ever make Team Canada at 18 years old. So he started working with me. Within 7 hours, we increased his vertical touch height by 3 inches. So he now holds the second highest recorded spike touch height in history. He did that when he was, I think, 18 years old, which is 12.6.5, which is, I think, 382, 384 centimeters. I could be off by a centimeter or two on that one, but just ungodly. Yeah. But more so, the only reason he was there is because we resolved all his injuries doing isometrics. Because otherwise, he was injury prone. He's got an interesting sort of pigeon chest. So I can basically put my fist in his rib cage, which is kind of cool. Not internally, but just externally. So it was kind of cool. So we started working with him when he was 16 years old. We won like the beach volleyball title and stuff like that with him and his partner. And so just being around that youth athletes, we see the impact that we have immediately with them. Yeah. We've helped a couple ladies qualify for scholarships down in the States for rowing, which you would think, well, volleyball is no different than rowing. But a guy named Phil Moncton, who was the former head of high performance for Rowing Canada, I was helping him a couple of years ago compete for the Head of the Charles event. And that's a race down in Boston. So it's a 5-kilometer race. Okay. And where we were talking about different variations of isometrics. I mean, Phil was a genetic freak. There's no way to describe him. He's 6'6". He's 230 pounds of just like a beautiful Adonis. Okay. And with a gas tank, I think it was the second highest recorded MVO2 ever measured during his Olympic years. Wow. So just like this wicked level. So we helped him cut off 10 seconds of his race time in 3 months. And we were only doing isometrics. And you got a dude he'd been to 3 Olympics, or qualified for 3, went to 2 because Russia canceled. So a senior athlete, right? He was 62 years of age, and we made him better. And so we were doing 1-minute deadlift holds. And this is one of the sick things I did with him. So we did 19 1-minute deadlift holds, right? Maximum effort deadlifts, okay. 19 minutes in a row with 5-second transition time between 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, and we'd go up to 90 degrees every 10 degrees, down, up, down. So for 19 minutes, if you can, and you'll experience Isophit in a little bit, and you go, he did that for 19 minutes? Yes. Then we did explosive isometrics, 50 reps. So 50 pulses at each one, up and down. So basically you had, going up, so it was 450, coming down 450. So 900 pulls. And that would be a chunk of his workout. So I'm not saying don't work hard. I'm saying work hard safely at a level you've never contemplated.
That would almost be equivalent to like a 2.5-hour dynamic workout then, correct? If we're going with that 19 by 5.
Yeah. Oh, and it was,
like
it was usually
just under maybe.
Yeah, it was
45, 50.
Usually a half-hour workout, so it would be the equivalent of a 3-hour workout. And I'd seen him 3 times a week. Wow. Right, during that time. So for him, it was basically the commitment to 90 minutes a week, but you were getting the benefits of 450 minutes, right? So it's like, okay, but with less risk, with healing agents, right, in the sense that there's a natural analgesic effect, meaning you can get rid of pain. So he's living in this environment where it's like, I'm functioning better, and I no longer have the pain I was having when I was doing all this other dynamic training stuff. And he continued doing that. He was rowing every day, on water training and stuff like that. But it's like, you take somebody who is that high level, and then you take them to a whole different level within weeks.
Why aren't more people talking about isometrics? Because I hear the past 40 minutes, this conversation is like, man, there's crazy knowledge being dropped. There's clearly results off the charts of what it can do. You don't need a $2,700 machine. You can do it using a wall. That's one of the things you've advocated for, is the fact that you don't need to buy this machine. You can use a wall.
I appreciate it if you do, but yeah.
That's the crazy part. And I have to give credit. Sal DiStefano from Mind Pump Media was actually someone who's talked about it. That team has talked about isometrics, the benefits of it. And that was where I was introduced maybe a couple of years ago, and like the emphasis on it. But growing up, we would do planks training. You'd do those isometric sessions, and you're like, oh, I don't feel like I'm really working out the same because I'm not doing a bicep curl or doing a squat with weight on the back. It doesn't look the same, right? And doesn't feel maybe as challenging in the moment. But obviously the results are tremendous. Why are people not talking about this?
So if you're looking at a wall sit or a plank, I mean, traditionally it's been taught as an abusive method of exercise, right? It's a punishment. Right.
Exactly.
Right. And there is no real way to upregulate the load, right? So it's durational, right? So in the world of isometrics, there used to be a thing called yielding and overcoming. Basically, one is holding in space for a period of time, and one is pushing into an immovable object. That has been subsequently changed as more science got involved to what's called a holding isometric muscle action, so a HEMA. So that would be the equivalent of your plank or your wall sit, where you're just holding for a period of time. And now there's what's called PEMA, which is a pushing or pulling isometric muscle action, which is where you're pushing into something and you're trying to sort of overcome that. And obviously, that's where we as a company sort of live. Right? We do a little bit of HEMA work, but for the most part, it's primarily that pushing or pulling isometric muscle action. And there, you're able to upregulate tension. Right, where you're just holding. I mean, you can try to pick a load, and we can sort of go into that a little bit. But if I'm holding a load in space and I get tired, that load gets heavier relative to my fatigue state. Right. So I'm putting that athlete under risk. So, and as you can see where I've been talking about, I don't want to put my athletes under risk. So to me, it's like almost a bona fidely useless exercise, even though it is isometric, because it's hard to, what weight did you want to use? Well, if you have to lift a heavy enough weight, you have to lift it up into position, you have to put it down, right? But you're putting it down in a fatigue state. So there's risk. I love living in risk-free environments where high effort, high reward, high yield. So in a PEMA environment, I can push into this as hard as I can, right? So you hear that, so if I just put my hand there and push up, you don't hear that. So I don't have to have that collision force, right? So or the inertial effects of load traveling through space. So if I'm pushing up into that, what's going to happen is I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to go up, and let's say I hit 100 pounds, right? In a HEMA environment, I have to shove up 100 pounds. Here I have to basically just start at 0 and press up into. And now when I fatigue, and we coined this term force matching technology, which is literally a play off Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if I'm pushing up and I generate 100 pounds of force, but I start getting tired, I can no longer generate 100. I go to 90, I go to 80, I go to 70, I go to 60. So you're going to have a down regulation of effort, but an increase in perceived exertion. So now from an athlete mindset, I can train you in a totally fatigued, mentally brutal and physical brutal environment, but the load is changing in real time, making it safer for you. Right? So now your tendons can get stronger durationally. With tendon forms that outer surface of your bone called your periosteum. So now your bone gets stronger. Isometrics increases blood flow to bone, so it helps with the healing process of bone. The muscle becomes more dense, it becomes wickedly stronger, and when you compare dynamic exercise to isometrics, for the increase in isometric muscle strength, which is what your power comes from and your force comes from and all this, isometrics produces 200% better results than dynamic exercise. So as to answer your point, why aren't people doing this? That's a good question, but they're starting to.
Okay.
There's been a massive groundswell. That's why all these sports agencies are starting to contact me, because there's information in my head that is not in textbooks. It's the amalgamation of basically 15 years of reading pretty much every single piece of scientific literature that's come out on isometrics. I'm mildly obsessive, for lack of a better word. I usually read anywhere between 7 and 15 studies a day. And it varies between things on what's called white matter, which helps with inter-brain communication. And that's things like for Alzheimer's or MS or Parkinson's disease. And how does isometric exercise influence that? to sport performance stuff, right? So if it has that word in there, isometrics, I am all over it. Mildly obsessive, as I said.
We'll have to link your like top 10 studies or maybe
Absolutely.
top 5 because I think people would enjoy reading them. I know I will for sure. Tell me about being the keynote speaker at Toronto Blue Jays 2010.
You gotta.
I know I had to. We got to rep the brand here in CO.
It was pretty awesome. So at that point in time, so my daughter is just born, right? I'm
at 2 pounds.
2 pounds, 12 ounces. So
unit.
so I'm sitting in the neonatal unit. I get a phone call from my sister-in-law, and she's like, "Hey, Brad, I got this unbelievable opportunity. We were just contacted by the Toronto Blue Jays. Their keynote speaker bailed, and they're looking for somebody to talk." And we'd sent them some material prior to this. So this is a Thursday. I believe the meeting was on Tuesday. So I have my wife in the hospital, so postpartum, wicked complications. My daughter's born at 2 pounds, 12 ounces. She's in the neonatal intensive care unit at a different hospital. And it's like, oh, wow, this is crazy. So I get to get up there. And this is a piece of advice. And this is my first ever public speaking engagement.
Okay, no
So,
big deal.
No big deal. So I got Paul Beeston and Nick. I'm going to brutalize his name. He's with Atlanta now. So basically, they're the front row. Yeah, and Anthopoulos. Anthopoulos? Topless.
Yeah. Alex Anthopoulos?
Yeah. Sorry, Alex, not Nick.
That's okay.
I told you I was going to brutalize his name. So anyways, they're in the front row, and we're talking about the benefits of isometrics, for sport performance and workplace safety. And we created a whole program in place that, it's downloadable and there's no machine required, and anyone who wants it, just email me and I'll send you a copy of it. Okay. Basically, it's the whole program that I gave to, a whole bunch of sports teams a whole bunch of years ago. And so I'm talking to an audience. And because I'm like, oh my God, there's the interim GM and the president of the company. So I'm talking to them and I walk away from the microphone. So I have an audience of 300 people, but I'm talking to 2 people. And it was the worst mistake for 2 reasons. First mistake, because I didn't get the engagement of the audience I was wanting, because nobody could hear me because I was talking to these 2 people. So the presentation ends and they both run me over. They ran from their seats. They literally physically body checks me because they didn't stop. Because I guess I stepped forward as they were coming, and I fall to the ground. So that was the end of my presentation. They're like, well, who else is doing this? I'm like, nobody. They're like, oh my God, well, how do we learn more? I'm like, well, here's my program. Never heard back from them again. So 2 things. Stay in front of the microphone or wear a headset, and never give away your entire program for free. It was interesting. A side note, a buddy of mine created the Nike Free.
Okay.
And as the story goes, their legal team came in and said, hey, we heard you have a wicked new shoe design. Do you mind just signing some paperwork? How much money do you normally charge for training? $150. Cool, we'll pay you for 2 hours of your time. Sold his rights to Nike Free for $300. Video crew, legal team, marketing team, all at the meetings. So the story goes.
Whoa.
Yeah, so just be mindful if you're a young entrepreneurial person who's really excited about talking to big tech or big corporations. They don't always play nice in the sandbox.
You've got 25 patents to your name. I believe the one regarding...
Somewhere around there nowadays.
Yeah, I remember listening to one podcast you were on talking about it. It's like 100+ page document, basically anything to do with isometrics you guys
Man, yeah, it's my patent document is, I think it's 106 pages. We basically patented geometric shapes above a platform for the purpose of doing isometric exercise. And it's a utility patent versus a design patent. So, and there's a subtle difference in the sense that this utility patent governs the use of versus the ornamental design of, which would be that design patent. So that whole process, it's pretty cool actually. So being a fitness guy, not knowing anything about law, I was introduced, so one of my clients happens to be the second or a senior partner in one of Canada's largest law firms. So he had broke his neck doing yoga.
Stretching. You gotta share that story, because apparently if you stretch far enough, you can snap some stuff.
Oh, absolutely. There's an end to stretching. It's called break. Because what happens is, from a materials perspective, I mean, if you think about it, it goes from an elastic state to a plastic state, and then it ruptures. So that's if you think about an ACL tear, or if you think about a bone break, it's just there was too much force going through and your body couldn't withstand that force. So this gentleman happened to be doing a yoga posture, and I don't specifically know the names of it, but he was lying with the shoulders on the ground, head tucked in, and he's trying to bring his knees and his feet behind his head, right? And the yoga instructor came over and gave him a little bit of an assist, and it fractured C3 and C4. I think C2, so he's got a 3-level spinal fusion in his neck, and it's like, okay, cool. So this is, and this gentleman who the utmost respect for, but he's not a well-liked dude amongst certain populations because he's crusty.
I think you described him as a cactus.
He's interesting. He's thorny, definitely thorny. But I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for him. So I do appreciate all his work throughout many, many, many years. And this is going back to 2008 when we started my legal work. No, 2009. Yeah, 2008, 2009. So since then, buddy, he's been in my life since about 2005.
I can't imagine, as a lawyer, you show up to your yoga studio, you're like, oh, I'm just going to come in, get relaxed, stretch out, feel good, and come back with a broken neck.
Oh, I know. Well, I jokingly say he was sent out, and this is a joke, so I jokingly tell the story as though he was sent there for anger management. It might have been true. Yeah. But you look at that, and it's just a bad scenario. But anyways, so he basically, I tell him about this wonderful idea I have about creating this, basically a fancy wall in the middle of a room, right? Because we talk about Isophit and the original unit literally is a wall that I can put in the middle of a room. And so we take it and go, okay, Ruben, I got this wonderful idea. And he goes, Brad, sorry to swear on your podcast, but he goes, you're a f***ing idiot, just stop. I'm like, okay. Not the answer I was looking for, but sure. He's like, no, but if you're serious, I'll introduce you to my patent lawyer. The first hour is free. After that is $450. I'm like, okay, I'm balling, man. I got like 25 grand in my bank at this point in my life. So, we just went through some wicked educational stuff and all that sort of stuff. So I got 25 grand. That's not bad. My wife my at the time girlfriend is currently pregnant. I have my business. She has her business. It's no issue at all. Right? And it's like, okay, so we have some going through the design and the engineering stuff. So that's eating away some funds. The patent lawyer, meet with him, and he comes back, and we do what's called a patent search. So you have to go through the archives to go through the U.S. patent to see if we're going to basically be infringing on anyone's sort of IP, so intellectual property. And he comes back, and his name's Armand. And Armand goes, Brad, I've never seen this before in my life. And I'm going, what? He's like, there's virtually nothing in the U.S. Patent Office on isometric-based exercise. I'm like, is that good or bad? He's like, that's wicked. It's good. I'm like, so what's that mean? He's like, this is a go if you want to. So then we just design this epic novel of a patent. He's like, be as broad, be as this. And I'm going through, like, at this time, iTunes University was wicked popular.
It's not ChatGPT nowadays.
It's not ChatGPT, which is wicked awesome. I love it. So I learn all this patent law, right? So I'm like literally just hoarding information from Stanford and Yale and Harvard, just going through their patent law programs because it's all free online. So I'm learning about patent law so I can, save on that $450, right? It's like I can ask a logical question. So long story short, couple months go through, got all the engineering drawings done, do this wonderful stuff. My patent lawyer goes to me, and at this point, my daughter, who is just recently born, who is in the hospital, goes to, basically, so I get a phone call as I'm walking up to see her, and she's at St. Mike's, which is literally just down the street from where we are right now. And he goes, Brad, I just want to let you know there's been some overruns, but we're ready to file. I hope, are you sitting down? I'm like, what do you mean we're sitting down? My daughter came 3 months early. I want to point that out. So my wife just lost her business. I'm not functioning at optimal because I'm going to the hospitals to see both wife and daughter. So he goes, hey, just want to let you know, your bill's $45,000 plus HST, so like $47,000. I'm going, I only had $25,000. And then
Thanks for the heads up.
Thanks for the head up. Yeah. So it was like, oh my God, like I'm literally screwed. And this is the power of the internet, how we got connected. So later a couple days later, actually, I post because I was like overwhelmed. So a couple days later, I just put a Facebook post, and it's like to the effect, I can't believe this. Like I'm basically royally screwed. I get a call 15 minutes later. And this lady who I used to train, and she's super private, so I don't mention her name ever. She goes, Brad, I just want to let you know, I have a check for $100,000. I will drop it off to you on Monday. I'm going, excuse me? He's like, I have a check for $100,000. I want you to not worry. I want you to help people like you helped me. And it was like, this is no, she's like, no, it's serious. I'll see you Monday. So Monday shows up. She's there. She hands me a check. She's walking away. She turns around. She goes, oh, by the way, what do I get for this? I'm like, how's 10%? She's like, good.
$1 million valuation.
$1 million valuation, from a Facebook post.
Wow.
So it's pretty remarkable, because I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs out there that do listen and have hopes and dreams. And my advice is live them. You're going to fail, # you're going to learn along the way, and you're going to change direction, and that's all good. Because I wouldn't be here if I was worried about the money. If my goal is not to make money, my goal is to help people, to eradicate poor health, because there's a thing when you start to look at what we're doing across the board, you can look at it and go, okay, there's a whole bunch of studies out there talking about the importance of grip strength all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And this is the bane of my existence. They measure it isometrically, and they don't write the word isometric within the study at all. And it's like, okay, it's kind of like me telling you, hey, Dave, I want you to get stronger. What are you going to do? You're going to go out and lift weights and do a whole bunch of movement stuff.
Yeah.
That's not what I meant, Dave. I meant get stronger, and you're going to.
But I'm following Instagram workouts.
Right?
That's what I thought I was supposed to do to get stronger.
Yeah, no. What they meant was isometric, but they forgot it. They omit it, and it's numerous studies like that. So when it comes back to why aren't more people doing it? Because the scientists are skipping and omitting a word. Why is that? I'm not sure. I live in the realm of conspiracy theory, because if there's a way that lowers your blood pressure that doesn't require medicine.
Well, big pharma action. I thought we were staying away from that.
Well, yeah, that one. It's only going back to research on isometrics and hypertension to 1969, right? So they found out that isometrics was a way that you could lower blood pressure in 1969. And the American Heart Association didn't actually recognize it publicly really in 2014.
Whoa.
Right. So
what's going on? Why is it taking a 50-year gap for it to be recognized?
Because it's not sexy. I mean, in the 70s, you had an uptake of orthopedic surgeons, right? And I'm sorry, you go to a gym anywhere in the city, they always got a therapy clinic.
Yeah.
Talk to the therapist, ask them why they joined a gym. It's because it's low-hanging fruit. They're all injured. They're all broken. They all have the thought process of, I want to live a healthier life. But yet they're all injured, right? That's why we have a therapy industry. Yeah. It's because people exercise and they're not. So you look at that and you go, why are they being injured exercising? Because they're just not prepared to exercise. And the way you prepare for exercise is actually not by moving.
That foundation piece.
Yeah, and which is totally missed, right? So once you start moving, you're practicing the marketing term of the activity that you're choosing to do, whether it's jogging, whether it's swimming, whether it's yoga-ing, whether it's Pilates, whether it's running, whether it's football, basketball, you name it. It's the action of, and then you have a set of rules or principles, but you're practicing. You're not actually prepared to do it. Right? And where do you prepare for it? And that's where we fill in that gap. And that's why what we do transfers to so many different sports or so many different health outcomes or desired health outcomes is because we actually get you to learn how to contract muscle before you move. Yeah. Right? And it's just that simple step. And one thing that we as a species have to recognize, we shrink with aging. right? So that means and we'll simplify this, means you're loosening the bolts on your car as you get older.
It's a good analogy, yeah.
And then we tell you to drive.
Yeah, go fast.
Go fast. And it's like, well, hold on, but it's rattly, right? That's that instability we keep talking about. And it's like, well, drive more. I was like, hold on. Well, exercise is medicine. Well, let's add more volume and let's add speed and let's add further distance, but let's loosen the bolts a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And the outcome is injury. The outcome is broken. The outcome is poor health. The outcome is avoidance of exercise because the result isn't there. You're having to spend all this money on therapy, and it's like, you know what? Forget it. And the learning curve of a dynamic exercise is significant, right? It's not like you just show up at the gym and you go, I'm an expert.
Yeah.
Because there's skill, heavily or high amount of skills required, as opposed to what I'm telling you to do. Push into something that doesn't move.
How tough to screw up.
It's pretty hard to screw up. It's pretty low risk, and more so, there's almost no skill involved. So maximize your strength. Go practice skill. Once again, name the sport of the activity. Gardening, it's a skill. Like, you know, that stuff's tough. You know, having to squat, having to move, having to do all this sort of stuff. I mean, do that with my mom, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, Mom, you do this? She's like, and we used to have a big farm, so she had 120 gardens on her farm, or on the property. So she was like 10 hours a day in the gardens. So, I mean, her level of strength and fitness at that point was insane. Yeah. You know, they downsized subsequently as they got a little bit older, but, you know, it's just that level of work, and it's like, wow, that's insane.
Would you be implementing isometrics from the youngest age possible? Is that, like, because I know there's mixed reviews on weight training at a young age for youth. Our goal here, educate, entertain, inspire the next gen. Isometrics, good alternative for young athletes to be implementing from day one?
Yes, it should, before you even put them in sport. I mean, realistically, you should have them. And I know that's hard because, you know, you're looking at 2 or 3 year old kids sometimes, depending on the sport you're at. But if they're able to take instruction, that's when you should start actually implementing isometrics, right? Because you need them to be able to tolerate those forces, right, of tumbling, somersaulting, you know, running, jumping, playing, climbing, right? All of these little things, like you think about it, if you're on a monkey bar, and I think that's still a thing, when you fall off the monkey bars, right? What was that impact force? Right, it's not insignificant, right? We get up, brush it off, go run around, right? But once we start to think about organized sport versus play, you have to think about, okay, now is the time to implement isometrics. I got to make sure this kid is strong. I got to make sure this kid's neurological system is enhanced. And more so, I got to think about tendons, and I got to think about ligaments, right? Which, once again, are not traditionally talked about until they're injured.
Right.
Right?
Tell me about driving back down to Cleveland in your introduction to the FBI through the NBA.
Indirectly, so as you will hear, all my stuff happens on social media, even though I don't really have a big social media following.
Not yet.
Not yet. So I noticed a guy named Derek Millender, and this man arguably has opened Pandora's box for me. So that's the level of respect and admiration I have for this human. So I see Derek, who is the strength and conditioning coach for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I see that he liked something on our Instagram page. I'm like, no, that's what? You got to be kidding me. So I sent him a message. Hey, noticed you like this. Is there a way that I can, help answer your questions? He's like, well, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I'm interested in Isophit. I'm like, okay, cool. I can drive down tomorrow. He's like, what? He's like, I'm in Cleveland. I'm like, yeah, and I'm in Toronto. So what's your point? He's like, well, okay. So literally the next day I jumped in a car, drove to Cleveland, met him, and I'm not a salesperson. I want to help educate you. I want to help you. I want to change the outcome of your life through positive means. And so we get along great because he's just a sponge for knowledge. And he's like, this thing is so cool. And I'm showing him our portable mobile strength kit. And so he's just like, why isn't everyone doing this? Why isn't, this is amazing. I'm like, well, because it takes people like you telling other people. It doesn't take me telling other people. Like if I'm telling you how great it is, you're going to say, you're just trying to sell me. I'm like, well, sure. But it's when he tells you, you're like, you use it, you experience something. So he started using it, I went down once, went down twice. He bought his unit. He then started implementing it with some of his people. And he goes to me, he's like, hey, Brad, the NBSCA, so the National Basketball Strength and Conditioning Association, has asked me to do a talk. I would like to do it on isometrics. Do you mind if we kind of feature isometrics and Isophit? And would you mind, like, because it's like you're the expert, I'm not, I'm new to this, but I'm obviously an expert in sport development. I mean, the dude is like wicked knowledgeable in that area. So we collaborated and so constructed a kind of a wicked presentation. So jump forward to June. So he presents on this and it was pretty remarkable. So that goes like globally. So we basically pick up 5 sport NBA teams within hours of his presentation. So that was kind of cool. But how we end up in the FBI, so this is awesome. So Cleveland, Ohio. So there's this former UFC heavyweight champion by the name of Stipe Miocic who lives in Cleveland. And if I'm going to be in your town, I'm going to reach out to the who's who of the sports performance world. Hey, I can help you. I can help your athletes be better. I can live in the back. I don't need to be front and center as you're sort of learning. I want you to excel. So I reach out to this guy, Bobby Khalil, and first message, no response. Send him another message, no response. Third message, I'm like, hey, I'm actually going to be in Cleveland on my family vacation. Like that's how cool Cleveland is. If you've never been, go check it out. I loved it. So I sent him a message. I'm going to be in town from Monday to Wednesday. I'm able to meet. So go down to Cleveland, have a fantastic trip, hear nothing. The next week, so I'm already back in Toronto, so I get a phone call. Hey, it's Bobby. I'm really, really sorry. Just got your message. I'm able to meet on Friday this week. I know you said you're going to be in town, but I'm like, yes, awesome. So cool. So I'm like, hey, Bobby, I'll see you on Friday. What time? So drive back to Cleveland because I'm already back in Toronto. And basically, so he's now heading up this organization called the Spire Academy, which is like almost 800,000 square foot training center and academy. So it's a high school program. And we go there, and this thing is colossal. It's, I think, the second or first biggest training facility in the world. Okay. That level of scale. I think they got 12 basketball courts, 3 Olympic pools. It's insane. Outdoor programming. They just bought 800 more acres of land to do some stuff. So I meet Bobby, and he's like, I'm busy. Can you show Demond the machine? And so he's like, okay, cool. So he's over there listening, doing stuff. And he's like, hey, Brad, I hope you don't mind. So I work with the FBI. Like, okay. He's like,
am I in trouble?
Yeah, kind of. It's like, thanks. He's like, no. So I got a meeting with them on Tuesday. Do you mind if I take a unit and go over and present to them on it? I'm like, you haven't even actually been on the machine yet. He's like, yeah, I know, but I understand the concept and it's so phenomenal. I just want to help you out. This is so great. And so he does get on it, he does try it, and he's absolutely blown away. And here's the strength coach for the UFC heavyweight champion and all his acromens. I mean, he's done way more than just train Stipe. And so he contacts me on Wednesday. He's like, oh my God, they love it. He's like, so this one's sold, and and the story.
We need 5 more units.
We won't go into that part. But it's pretty cool that within a minute of meeting a gentleman, he did become a pitch man. Now, how did I end up in Hollywood? Now, this is really cool. So Derek Millender was going on a West Coast trip. So he happens to know a gentleman by the name of Jason Walsh. And Jason Walsh owns a company called Rise Nation, which is a VersaClimber company, as well as Rise Movement, and that's more of a personal training studio in West Hollywood. Rise Nation's a franchisable model, and they have locations. I think they're 16 or 18 locations, like that number. So Derek, I arranged for him to have an Isophit while he's out in LA. And so Derek pitches the product to Jason. And so here I have, on one side of the world, we got Stipe Miocic trainer pitching Isophit to the FBI for me. Well, it's for him, because I mean, at the end of the day, it helps him too. And then I got on the other side of not the world, the US, I got Derek pitching Jason the Isophit. So I get a phone call from Jason within hours. He's like, yeah, so I'd like to order one, thanks. So send him one down. So all of a sudden, and Jason, I mean, if you just Google him for the audience, I mean, he trains the who's who. Zoe Saldana, Jennifer Lawrence, Bradley Cooper, Matt Damon. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I'm not going to say any of those use Isophit, because I'll just say I don't know. With the exception of Zoe Saldana, because that was in a recent Shape magazine article, which basically stated that Isometrics or Isophit is really kind of the new Hollywood celebrity workout, which, I mean, that is just phenomenal. Yeah. I'm a massive Zoe Saldana fan as well, right? I mean, Avatar is brilliant. Guardians of the Galaxy, I think I've watched that numerous times with my daughter and stuff like that, and it's just phenomenal. So to have that, professional sports organizations using it, and also acting as advocates, for it. That's how we ended up in the Philadelphia 76ers, because Derek showed Ben. And Ben, Kenyon is his last name. And they're like, yeah, I'm on the phone with Ben, and he's the strength coach of the 76ers. And I would have thought that it was like basically, hey, we're doing something secret. No, that's not how they play. They're all like, we want the best product on the field. The best man wins, not the secretive strategy. And they all change teams anyway, so the likelihood that you would ever have competitive secret knowledge, it doesn't really exist in professional sports. So it's like, how do we make the athletes the best that they can be, so we have the best talent on the floor all the time? And that's their attitude, and it's just such a pleasure to work with these professionals across, all spectrums. To be honest, we're with some of the senior people in hospitals in the city, not the hospital, but the CEOs and stuff like that, and they're using Isophit and stuff like that, where it's like for their own physical health, they're turning to our product. Where it's like these are the brilliant minds that are literally saving lives are using our product, and it's pretty awesome.
Is there an individual in particular or a team in particular that stands out, that advocates for it a lot? I think back to Joe Gajana, who was on a couple weeks ago, last time we were in Toronto. She's also in Toronto, and she worked with Kevin Looney with the Golden State Warriors, saw tremendous success this year. He played in all 82 games. Similar to you, focus on making sure you're performing and able to be on the court and not being injured. Any stand out to you? Obviously, Joel winning MVP, James, I know Coach Mike also, who trained some of the most incredible basketball players in the world.
I'm going to go old on this one.
Okay.
I'm going to go Canadian icon.
Ooh, I got a feeling I know who you're going to say.
Kurt Browning.
My mom's going to be so fired up, and Phoenix's mom too.
Oh, man. What an amazing human being. So we met a couple of years ago, and he had just injured. So he was a client of a trainer that would work out of one of my gyms in the city. Okay. And you'd see him, and it's like, yeah, that's Kurt Browning. But we're Canadian, so you respect his privacy. You don't run up and sort of say, oh my God, you're Kurt Browning! Wow! So it's like, hey, Kurt, and that was the level of our conversation. And then he hurt himself. So he was playing a shinny hockey game, and somebody just bowled him over, and he had injured his arm. And it's like, so neurologically, basically, his arm, he couldn't move. And he's like, well, this isn't good. It's not how I want to sort of spend my time. And, the trainer knows I do some pretty cool stuff. So she's like, hey, can you help Kurt? I'm like, I can try. That's all I say to anybody. I can try. I've had success with many people. And so he's like, okay, cool. So I think it was like going from not being able to use his arm to 3 sessions later, he's like, oh, wow, that's cool. Oh, I was just contacted by an organization out in Kingston, like a skating club out in Kingston. And they want me to do a thing. You think you can help me get ready for that? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, when is it? He's like, 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, well, when was the last time you skated? Well, at this point, Kurt was kind of retired. So he had actually stopped skating, and he was like, I'm done.
Whoa.
And he's like, this injury was just one of those things. Like, I'm injured. It's like, okay, I'll do this like this will be my last thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, cool. And he's doing his Singing in the Rain number, right? So he's got to hold an umbrella. So in his left arm, and he puts his left arm over his right hand when he does his jumps, right? And to hold an umbrella, and you think about the centripetal force, here's the cool thing, which is an isometric contraction in order to rotate, we'll talk about that in a second. So he's like, I can't hold my arm in, right? Because he didn't have the strength to hold that in. So he doesn't have the isometric strength to hold his arm in, so he can spin faster, rotate, all this sort of stuff. So we get them there. And I was like, well, that was awesome. And so we created this program called 30 and 30, which is 30 isometrics in 30 minutes, right? 45-second muscle contraction, 15-second transition time into the next exercise. And we kind of designed this program because a lot of people are saying, I love Isofit, but I'm bored. Like, this is just boring when you're like doing all this muscle work and you're being all sciencey like. I literally want to...
You're just holding.
Yeah, and it's like, as I'm trying to be Mr. Science guy and line up all this stuff for strategic angles to target specific muscle tissue. I was like, okay, well, I don't want people to think this is boring, so we created this program. So I was like, Kurt, we're doing a thing. It's a 5-day challenge. Come in. So he's done his thing in Kingston. It was successful. He comes back. So he and 6 other people are involved. So Kurt loses basically 4.5 pounds in 5 hours of exercise. He's like, I don't have this weight to lose. So he was like kind of shredded, and so 5 hours of time is 10 workouts. So he's shredded. So we end up from there going, and he's like, I like this. I want to start training this way. So then he starts basically looking at it and going, okay, well, I want to train with you like 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Then I went from training to, I want to buy into this company. And I'm like, thanks, but no. And so Kurt bugged me for almost 2 years to buy into...
That's a hot lead.
For 2 years to buy into Isophit before he bought in. I was like, okay, yeah. I like
persistent enough.
Yeah, you're persistent, and I like you, and you are Kurt Browning. I mean, you are a Canadian icon, and I really enjoy spending time with you. And because like my investor pool is a close-knit group of friends. And it's like, okay, well, how do we introduce a new body into these people that I've known for a long time? Right. And it's like, okay, well, you're Kurt Browning. And they're all like, oh, Kurt Browning's Kurt Browning. And it's like, cool. So he invests. But it's been phenomenal. So jump forward. This is his final year with Stars on Ice. So to be able to take a guy back, and we started working when he was 53, so he's 56. Wow. So he's still skating, he's still doing triples, he's still doing all this stuff. So if I can fix an old athlete, senior athlete, however you want to phrase it, and we can get him a wise one, and we can keep him optimal, right? Now he's got aches and pains. I mean, he's lived a life, but he's still performing and generating revenue. And so that to me is probably my coolest, like truly coolest, because he's become basically not only like originally client, but an investor, but more so just a friend. Yeah. Where you can just, to sit around playing pool with Kurt Browning, and he's like talking about, when he was hanging out with Wayne Gretzky or Gord Downey, and like we're sitting there listening to, some sort of Canadian band, drinking beers, playing pool at his house. Yeah. Like this is a level of just awesomeness where it's like, thank you world, for listening to my hopes and my dreams, and to be honest, answering them, because my goal has only ever been to create health, change lives, and give back. It's never been about money. It's been about helping people. So, in service to others, the world just gives it back, which is pretty amazing.
I feel like I'm experiencing that right now, having conversations like this. It's been 3.5 years, and I am like feeling those same emotions, grateful for the fact that I've been able to have probably 2,000 hours worth of these conversations where I get to soak up, be a sponge, learn from incredible high performers, the arguably smartest people in the space, top performers in the big four, every sport, showcasing what they're doing. It's rewarding. And the fact that people are listening, sharing, showcasing what you're doing, what incredible athletes are doing, like, it's tough to beat,
Oh, I know. It's, just to be able to, help people and have people call and sort of say, hey, I'm interested in learning more.
Yeah.
And more so, thank you. You know, it's not like, you know, the thing I value the most is time, right? Because you don't get that one back. Like all the other stuff, money you can earn and lose and all that. Relationships come and go. Time, it just goes.
Yeah.
You know, and as I'm turning 50 and starting to recognize, you know, 50 for what it is, which is, you know, not the middle. You know, I'm not living to 100 most likely. So I'm on the significantly downside of that midway point. And I was like, how do I maximize time? How do I really create a legacy where Isofit goes beyond Brad? How this becomes the next spin bike, you know, where it permeates every level of society, you know, so we can make people have a healthier quality of life. I win.
Yeah.
You know, that's my mic drop. That's like the point where it's like, you know what? I'm a small town kid. I have some of the biggest organizations in the world contacting me almost daily now. And it's the beautiful thing, and this is the thing that is going to shock the audience. With the exception of my manufacturing partners, Isofit is just me, right? We don't have a sales team. We don't have a secretary. We don't have, well, technically it's me, it's all of it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's pretty remarkable that from my couch and from jumping at opportunities like, hey, you commented on an Isofit family member. You said, you know, Coach Mike G is the best, and he's pretty damn awesome. How do I meet you? You know, in 48 hours,
Now we're doing this.
we're doing this.
Yeah.
Right, but those are the opportunities. You got to be willing to take a chance. You got to drive to Cleveland. You got to get on a plane and go set up manufacturing in a foreign country you know nothing about, because it makes it easier to ship throughout Europe. You know, you got to be willing to take chances and risks. And like, I'm all in. There's no going back. It's not like I'm gonna stop. So it's like, well, like next week or 2 weeks from now, I'm at the sort of the NFL Combine, and then another couple weeks I'm over in Spain, and then I'm back to Canada, then I'm over to Germany, then I'm back, then I'm over to Italy, you know. So from now until, and then there's the NBA Summer League in there as well, so down to Vegas, you know. So from now to, you know, the end of October, you know, it's slammed, but yet make time for everybody. Somebody contacts you. Like I had a young lady who is she's over from Australia, and she literally contacted me this morning on LinkedIn. Hey, I'm a student. I'm over from Australia. I'm at the University of South Carolina. I love what you're doing with Isofit. And I'm like, hey, let me know when you're free to talk, right?
Yeah.
And people are like, hold on, why would you talk to a student? Why would you talk to somebody who just randomly reached out to you? Well, why wouldn't I talk to a student? Why wouldn't I make the time to help the next generation of people learn about my product? And more importantly, she's in the space, she's interested in it, and thank you for being interested. You know, and I think if more people acted that way and were willing to give up their most valuable asset, which is time, to help the next generation, I think society gets better.
Could not agree with you more. I could probably chat with you for hours. I really appreciate your time, Brad, sincerely. The way we wrap up every episode is we ask our guests what their biggest piece of advice would be. I feel like you've just dropped an hour and a half's worth of knowledge. Is there something you'd like to leave the audience with outside of taking advantage of opportunities when they propose themselves?
Learn to respect your peer, right? Truly take the insight that they're going to give you and listen for the good and the bad, right? Life is really hard out there. You know, sometimes it's tough, and you know, there's some interesting things happen every day. Just be mindful and notice it, right? The good and the bad, and recognize that if you're on the good side of the bad, it's been a good day, and tomorrow it might be bad, but the next day after that, you know, is going to get better. Like, and one of the things, like, I've had a couple of friends of mine, you know, commit suicide and stuff like that. There's always somebody out there that's willing to help. So just be mindful of that. It gets better. And if you're okay with recognizing that, you know, just reach out. If you got issues, talk to somebody. So that would be my thing. And more importantly, just enjoy life. You know, don't take it overly serious. Like yesterday I asked you, it's like, what's the attire? And it's like, and you said, where do you want? I'm like, I want shorts and, running shoes. And this is how I show up most places. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I own 2 suits, but I bought them last year, and my first suits in 30 years. And I told the suit guy, it's like, he contacted me. He's like, I responded. It's like, no, I'm not interested, not until my daughter's graduating. And he's like, when's that? I'm like, I don't know, 5 years from now. And he's like, oh. And then I got an invite to this event in Portugal. And it's like, oh. So the next day, it's like, so he took the opportunity to reach out to me. If he didn't reach out to me, he wouldn't have made X number of thousands of dollars on suits in the next week, right? But so take a chance, send somebody a message, remember their name, like all of those little things. And don't ever be afraid to say hi to anybody. Respect their time and don't be intrusive, but say hi to everybody. So
I think there's something like Michael Scott, Wayne Gretzky said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Something like that. Yeah. My mom always taught me, she's like, what are they going to say? No. Okay. Then they say no. Big deal.
Brad Thorpe, Mr. Isometrics, thank you so much for your time.
Dave, really thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
That's good.
We got handshake. There we go.
Just wanted to say thank you again for tuning in to the 175th episode of the Athletes Podcast that was brought to you by Rooted. Don't forget AP18 to get 18% off yourself some Rooted. Get Rooted every single day. It's the best. Brad dropped some incredible knowledge. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to him. Check out the show notes down below where we've got the studies that he suggested that we read. Get up to date. His top 10. They're phenomenal. Thank you again for tuning in. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It's part of our athlete agreement. Everyone's doing it. Everyone's benefiting from it. We want you to as well. Can't wait to see you next week for another new episode of the Athletes Podcast. I'm your host, David Stark. Phoenix Wayland is our producer and editor, and Jordan Maslin is our website and app developer. Until next week, we'll see you then. Bye.